Hello, amigos. Welcome to Spain, the land of sun, sea, sangria, and some splendid railway systems. Ole! For much of the 20th century, Spain was stuck in the steam age, but not anymore.
High-speed trains now rocket along between major cities.
It's great. It does 200 miles an hour. What's not to like?
On electrified railway lines that are the envy of Spain's neighbours.
I want to find out how Spanish railways went from being bottom of the class to king of the heap.
From south to north.
The station's called Iron Colon, which is what you need with some of the Spanish food I've been eating.
From mines to mountains.
Made in Liverpool, like the Beatles.
And from folly...
What went wrong for Canfranc International, and why did they build it in the first place?
To triumph.
This is amazing. This is like receiving a new car, isn't it? All wrapped up. So let's see why the train in Spain is getting such acclaim.
My journey begins at the starting point of one of Spain's earliest railways. But I'm not actually in Spain.
This wild, windy place is the southernmost tip of the British overseas territory of Gibraltar. It's pretty cloudy, but you can just about make out the shoreline of Africa over there. And if I turn this way, 1,398 foot high, that is the Rock of Gibraltar that dominates this famous bastion of British sea power. And of course, all around here, this is the Mediterranean.
The British took Gibraltar in 1704, during Spain's decline from one of the most powerful world empires to the poor man of Europe. And we've been clinging on ever since, gradually turning the Rock into a huge fortress.
We British have been boring our way through the Rock like demented rodents ever since the 18th century for one very good reason. The Spanish have never actually given up their claim on Gibraltar, and in fact several times have tried to take it back.
Before I catch my first train, I've been invited by the local army boys to explore some of the secret military tunnels inside the Rock.
Hi Sam, Chris, how are you, mate?
Morning.
You take us round. Oh, it's pretty damp, isn't it?
It is.
It's going to be cosy, this. Pete, I think I love you. OK.
OK, Sam. Right, here we go. Let's go.
Oh, this is wild.
These tunnels, built during World War II, were designed to tackle the threat of aerial bombardment.
What we're moving through here is protection for the entry point. It's a blast trap, these series of pockets you can see.
Yeah.
So if an aircraft does get its bombs in the doorway, at least it'll sap energy out before it hits the main tunnel, which is what we're turning on to now. This is the Great North Road.
Oh, yeah, big sign, Great North Road, and that was made of ale there, wasn't it?
That's right.
As a strategically important naval base, helping the Allies control large parts of the Med, Gibraltar also faced a serious threat from German U-boats.
Now, immediately on your right-hand side, you'll see the remains of the World War II anti-torpedo nets. These were actually to guard the entrance to the harbour.
Did you say there's 34 miles of this?
Approximately. Not all roads. Some are pedestrian tunnels, some storage areas, hospitals, laundries, you name it. If there's a military requirement for it to be down here, it is down here.
This vast complex, accommodating up to 16,000 troops, has helped ensure Gibraltar remains British. A thorn in Spain's side, which didn't really help the development of the railways. And means my first journey must start here.
Hi, guys. Hi there. Hiya. Oh, Chris.
Like hundreds of soldiers and their families back in the late 19th century,
How are you, mate? Chris.
I have to get a boat to the station.
Quite nice at the moment.
It's going to be a little bit rough out there.
Rough? I don't do rough. This is the start of a 1,000-mile trek from Spain's Mediterranean south to Atlantic north. From Algeciras, I'll be riding the British-built Henderson line to Ronda, from where I'll head north to visit an important mining railway. before backtracking to Seville to ride Spain's first high-speed line. From Madrid, I'll head east to explore the Civil War battlefields of Catalonia. Then it's up into the Pyrenees in search of a legendary abandoned station, before I finally reach the coast, where I plan to explore Europe's longest narrow-gauge network and my final destination, Bermeo. Algeciras, pretty town centre, but I got a feeling that in 1892, this was not the station the trains departed from.
So this is my first Spanish train. It's pretty impressive. Bright, white, ever so clean, gleaming in the morning sunshine. There's something very weird though about the railway tracks these Spanish trains actually have to run on. About 150 years ago, when the Spanish first started building their railways, somebody made a very strange decision. They decided to build their tracks on a much wider gauge than anybody else's. They call it Iberian gauge. Now, it's not the trains don't work, they do, they work fine, but nobody else's trains can actually run on them.
A decision that would have ramifications on the state of Spanish railways for decades to come.
It's rather nice, isn't it? The line I'm travelling on at the moment, and actually the whole of this morning, sometimes call it Mr. Henderson's Railway. That's all because this guy, a London financier called Alexander Henderson, teamed up with a brilliant young engineer, John Morrison, during the 1880s. They wanted to construct a railway line that would run up to a place called Bobadilla. And at that point, the passengers could disembark and link up with networks right across Europe.
Since the line was intended mainly for Gibraltarians, selling this idea to the Spanish was no easy task.
Henderson and Morrison tried to get the Spanish government to give them permission to build their railway. Spain was pretty much bankrupt at the time, so obviously the idea was quite tempting. But negotiations were very tough. They dragged on in the end till nearly 1889.
Eventually they got the go-ahead, but only by making promises they couldn't possibly keep. In the late 1880s, construction finally began on Henderson's railway from Gibraltar, on the government proviso that the line would also serve all the small Spanish hilltop towns along its route. To explain what actually happened, a local British resident, Maurice Fitzgerald, is going to join me on board.
Maurice, it is a little early.
Never too early, dear sir. Never too early.
It's rather nice to meet an early morning bon viveur.
Maurice has spent years researching how this line was built.
Why did the Spanish
Bring British engineers, British designers, British everything to build a railway?
Why did the Spanish build the road?
In those days, the Spaniards didn't have enough money, they didn't have the technical know-how, and you find that virtually all the railroads in Spain were initially built by foreign companies. They imported the locomotives and the wagons from UK, so they had locomotives built in Russia.
Henderson and Morrison had made fortunes building railways in South America with the men for the job.
How difficult was it to build it?
Well, you are faced the usual thing. You're trying to make as smooth a path as you can through countryside that's basically all up and down and all over the place.
To fulfill their promises, they did build over a dozen local stations along the line, but down in the valleys below the towns.
I keep noticing though the stations.
Yes.
They're right in the middle of nowhere.
Well, when you're building the line, if you want to make it as easy as you can, as cheap as fine, you follow where it's easy to go, which is, in this case, the river. When we get to Gaucine, well, it says Gaucine Station, but Gaucine is 13 or 14 kilometres away on the top of the hill.
So it's a bit of a cop-out, really. You're not really serving anybody with the stations.
Well, you are. You're far better than you were in the past.
Of course, the Brits, stuck on the rock, didn't mind.
Was it instantly popular?
Yes, it was instantly popular because the Gibraltar garrison wanted to be able to get away from the rock. And so there were steamers across the bay. They extended the railway from Algeciras town itself down to the pier station. So you could get in a steamer in Gibraltar, cross the bay and climb into your train.
Be straight into a train.
Yeah,
which is
straight
good.
in your train.
And
And
presumably
then
very
set
good
off.
for the military guys and their wives and families. Just get away from the rock.
Get away and go up to Ronda.
Ronda is where I'm getting off too, following in the footsteps of those Gibraltar servicemen and their families who came to enjoy this historic city, which is a kind of microcosm of Spain's fractured past. Until 1485, this area was controlled by the Moors of North Africa. These Arab baths date back to the 13th century. For a while, Spain became the most powerful empire on the planet. In 1785, Ronda built one of the country's first bullrings, El Plaza de Toros. A magnificent arena graced by men of exceptional daring and skill.
Holly! I've always wanted to do that.
Constructed around the same time, the city's greatest landmark, the Puente Nuevo Bridge, survived Spain's decline, only to become stained by one of the darkest chapters in this country's history.
The Spanish Civil War lasted from 1936 to 1939. It pitted neighbour against neighbour and brought horror and misery to towns all over Spain, including Ronda. This beautiful bridge hides a dark secret. Then if you can see that balcony with the brown door, behind that there's a small room. And from 1936 onwards, it was used as a prison cell come torture chamber. And the story persists that during the course of those 3 years of civil war, literally hundreds of innocent people were hurled from the balcony down onto the rocks below.
Day 2.
I'm on my way to see yet another one of Spain's oldest railways. And this one, a bit like Mr. Henderson's railway of yesterday, has strong British connections.
Welcome to Mars. Actually, it's the birthplace of one of the world's mining giants, Rio Tinto, the Red River. They've been mining copper here by hand since Roman times. But in the 1870s, the Industrial Revolution was passing them by, until they let the Brits come in and lend a hand.
Good morning. You must be
Hello,
Marco.
good morning to you. This is Marco. Nice to meet you.
Is this the train that used to take the miners around?
Yeah, this is the old Rio Tinto train ready for us.
A great little train. Can we run?
Today, Marco is going to show me how British technology turned this into one of the biggest mines in the world.
Was this the original train when the mine started?
Yeah, nearly since the beginning. The British company came here in 1873,
Yeah.
and they brought the engine from Manchester in 1875.
So this little locomotive's been running around here for about 140 years.
Yeah,
That's pretty impressive, isn't
yeah,
it?
it is definitely.
Can we go for a ride in one of the carriages? Because I just want to see the whole complex, really.
Yeah.
For centuries, the ore mined here had to be transported by long-suffering mules over 20 miles to reach the nearest port. Replacing mule trains with steam trains increased output over 10 times to nearly 1 million tonnes a year.
How many trains did you have here?
The company ran nearly 150 steam engines.
150?
150.
Good grief.
It's amazing,
So it
yes.
must have been absolutely crisscrossed with...
Yeah, because we had 350 kilometers of branch lines.
It must have been an absolute hive of activity.
Yeah.
Really buzzing.
It was the most important mining area in the world in those years.
At its height, over 20,000 miners worked here, and the mine covered an area of over 100 square miles, but it eventually closed in 2001.
I do find this place a bit sad. It is like an old graveyard, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
What is that?
It is a steam crane.
A steam crane?
Yeah.
I've never heard of one.
Yeah, 1904.
Do you have many of them?
We had several ones.
What were they used for? What did they do with them?
To lift weight and to upload merchandise onto the wagon.
It's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
The fingerprints of the British can be found all over this old mine.
Made in Liverpool,
Yeah.
like the Beatles.
There's a century of railway history here, including some classic old buildings.
Ah, look at this. This is the original signal box.
The original one, North Signal Box.
The North signals. Because you have, what, 150 trains here all at once?
Yeah, yeah.
So they would have been off their feet in there, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Beautiful. I'd have enjoyed my trip to Rio Tinto. It must have been amazing. I think the conditions might have been a bit grim and the heat would have been unbearable. But it's quite a place. Look at that landscape, the colours. Anyway, on to Seville.
Foreign investment and technology helped gradually change Spain's fortunes. But it was another 100 years before this nation relaunched itself on the world stage.
Sun-kissed Seville, they call this place in the brochure. Seville is actually one of the oldest cities in Spain, but in 1992 it became a symbol of the modern age. Expo Sevilla 92 was a great world fair, and huge crowds flocked here from all over the world.
With a new democratic government, a booming economy, the Barcelona Olympics, and a wave of optimism, Spain rebranded itself as a modern nation.
The event was a huge success, and it proved to the world that Spain now had a bright present and an even brighter future. And high-speed rail travel was going to be very much part of that picture.
Spain's first ever high-speed railway line came into service on the opening day of the World's Fair. From Madrid to Seville and its brand new Santa Justa station.
Nice big station. Let's have a look. Salidas. That's departures, isn't it? So I need the Ave line. I want the high-speed train. Yeah, 1645, Madrid, Atocha Ave. Platform 4, OK?
Ave is short for Alta Velocidad Española, Spanish high speed. It also means bird.
Pretty amazing. Look at that. Look at the streamline. Well, that was like one of the Japanese bullet trains. It looks built for speed, this thing.
But I can't seem to find my carriage.
Oh, it is this one. Yeah, this one. Oh, it's very popular. Obviously, it's going to the capital. We're off. Bang on time. Here we go. Whoosh!
This Talgo 350 HSR is going to whisk me across the plains of Castile, nearly 300 miles to Madrid in just 2.5 hours.
When these high-speed trains appeared in Spain in the 1990s, they completely revolutionised transport across this huge country. The time it took from, say, Seville to Madrid was halved literally overnight, and people started using the railways in their droves. And in fact now, any city that's got an Ave station, basically people will always use the train rather than by car or plane.
It was a massive investment because high-speed trains need purpose-built high-speed lines. But the Spanish people were behind it.
That's 200 miles an hour. What's not to like?
The most revolutionary thing about this railway is the gauge. Abandoning wide Iberian gauge for European standard gauge means these trains can run through Europe. But how did Spain suddenly produce some of the most advanced trains in the world? At my next stop, I'm hoping to find out. In the suburbs of Madrid, I'm visiting a company called Talgo.
Oh, hello, Chris.
Carlos?
Since 1942, these guys have been innovating their way to become world leaders in train design. The two founders created the company in the early days of Franco's dictatorship. From the start, their trains were designed for speed and style, with futuristic aerodynamics. Trains that could change gauge to cross international borders, and even their own high-speed tilting technology. Now they're building Spanish bullet trains that look like huge duckbill platypuses with long, glossy tails. But what they're really keen to show me is their rolling assemblies, the wheels.
Okay, so Chris, this is where we actually manufacture the rolling assemblies of the Talgo trains.
Yeah.
And this what makes Talgo's technology so very different.
Well,
So-
explain, because I'm a real layman in this. I mean, the wheel's a wheel to me.
Okay, so the wheel is independent,
Yeah.
and we do not use traditional axles, which you would normally see across the world. So a straight bar across.
What's good about that then? What does
So
that
our
achieve?
wheels can actually optimise the condition of the railhead at very high speeds. So it reduces weight, reduces maintenance costs.
So a lot of it's lightness, actually. So if you're doing 200 mile an hour or whatever, like on the bends and everything, you want maximum safety, right?
Of course, yeah.
I've never bought a whole train, but what do you pay for a train?
In sterling, around 20 to 25 million pounds. Even better prices than that, depending on the quantities.
I don't want to buy one. I'm just interested. I wouldn't have a clue how much.
Out in the yard, John's keen to show me the latest high-speed train that's been built for Saudi Arabia.
That's pretty smart, isn't it?
It's a beautiful train.
It is actually. It's stunning.
The train's been designed, complete with independent wheels, for a new line to carry pilgrims across the Saudi deserts to Mecca.
So Chris, welcome to our Saudi Arabia trains.
It's pretty smart, isn't it? The Saudis are like this. Look at this. This is amazing. This is like receiving a new car, isn't it? All wrapped up. What sort of speed does this do?
Up to 350 kilometres an hour.
350. That's about 200 mile an hour. God, that's serious.
Obviously the train has been designed for dealing with the harsh desert conditions. 55 degrees centigrade with sandstorms. We've had to look at the fixtures and fixings, additional filters, different paint technology, all to deal with those conditions.
So, who's the boss now? It's quite a turnaround from importing steam trains from the British 150 years ago. And now the big finale. I get to meet Jose Luis López Gómez, one of the men who invented gauge-changing technology back in 1969.
What did they used to do when they wanted to take trains from the broad gauge to the standard gauge? What did they used to do?
Bueno, esta operación se tardaba del orden de 2 horas y además hacían falta entre 10 y 12 personas.
Yeah.
Era una operación muy lenta y complicada.
You and your young team completely changed all that. What do you do now?
Bueno, esta es una instalación para cambio automático de 2 anchos de vía. Ancho estándar europeo y ancho estándar Renfe.
What I'm about to see happens in sheds around Spain about 30 times a day, allowing trains to use both the old broad gauge tracks and the modern high-speed ones.
But it's coming in there now.
As the train enters the shed on Iberian gauge, the wheels are lifted off the track, automatically unlocked, pushed 23 centimetres closer together, relocked and dropped down onto standard gauge track. Simples.
That used to take a couple of hours. The whole thing took less than a minute. And nobody on that train will have had a clue that anything happened.
Todo esto a 15 kilómetros por hora.
That's very good. That's good. It's so simple, so simple.
Time to move on.
This is rather nice. It's a 100-year-old station here, right in the centre of Madrid. They've just decided to renovate it. And for no reason I'm quite sure, they've turned the whole thing into, well, it's a rainforest. Imagine the number of watering cans they'll need there. Look at it.
I can't offer to help, that's for sure. Time waits for no man. And neither do Spanish trains.
That's pretty good. Bang on time, coming out of Madrid. This is the Barcelona train, the 6:30. It's not actually a Talgo train, but it's, you can see it's pretty good.
This evening, I'm heading 260 miles east to the Catalonian city of Tarragona, from where I plan to explore some of the battlefields of the Spanish Civil War. The war began in July 1936, when Francisco Franco and other generals staged a military coup, to which millions of soldiers and civilians flocked in support. Over the next 2.5 years, Franco's supporters, the nationalists, waged relentless war against the Republican supporters of the elected government.
Between 350,000 and 500,000 people died during the course of the Spanish Civil War, and some of the bloodiest fighting was in Catalonia. I want to go to some of the scenes of the worst of the fighting, but also find out what relevance the railways had to the conflict. Beautiful sunny morning in Tarragona, lovely Spanish beach. But 80 years ago, Republican troops plus foreign volunteers, part of the famous international brigades, massed here on their way to the front. And that's where we're going this morning.
I'm travelling to the front lines, just as those Spanish soldiers and foreign volunteers did, by train.
The Republicans understood the importance of the railways far more than their nationalist opponents. They had many trade unionists in their ranks and a lot of railwaymen. They also had access to a lot of rolling stock, but none of these things guaranteed that they would win the war.
By 1938, the Republicans were being pushed back into their heartlands in Catalonia and Valencia. General Franco made further gains in the first few months of that year, and a nationalist victory seemed to be getting closer by the day.
The Republicans knew they had to stage one massive counter-offensive or face immediate defeat. So they gathered up their men and materials for one big final push. The stage was set for the biggest battle of the war, the Battle of the Ebro.
The battle takes its name from one of Spain's biggest rivers, which I think is quite close to here. I've come to see an unusual remnant of the battle near a place called Fayón.
That weird-looking jetty over there is all that remains of what was once a vital bridge that carried the main railway line between Madrid and Barcelona. The Republicans knew that if the bridge remained in nationalist hands, Franco would be able to move huge amounts of men and munitions into Catalonia and probably bring them to their knees. So they determined, before the Battle of the Ebro even started, to blow up the bridge.
The attack took place on the 27th of March, 1938.
Under heavy gunfire, the Republican sappers moved along the bridge planting explosives. It worked, the charges went off, and the bridge was completely destroyed. It almost certainly kept the Republicans in the war.
The Republicans could now go on the offensive.
On the night of the 24th of July 1938, Republican troops crossed this river under cover of darkness. They completely surprised the Nationalist Army and inflicted heavy losses. However, within a matter of weeks, Franco's army had turned the tables, and the whole thing then became a battle of attrition.
It's a time most Spaniards want to forget. But up in the hills, there's a little town called Corbera de Ebro, where the locals decided they did want to remember.
This charming little town was occupied by the Republican Army in July 1938. At the beginning of the Battle of Ebro, they were under small arms fire for 3 months, and regular artillery fire came in from there. But the biggest pounding came from up there.
German air crews under Franco's command blitzed the town with high explosives night after night. The appalling effect of these raids is still evident everywhere you go in this town.
This is the parochial church of San Pedro. It was the only place of worship for miles around for people who lived anywhere near this beautiful little town. But in that terrible summer of 1938, it was German bombs that came pounding down onto the town, ripping huge holes out of that beautiful old 18th century church roof and reducing the buildings and streets all around to rubble. At the end of the Civil War, the people of this battered, once beautiful town made the decision to leave the town exactly as their enemies had left it. And 80 years later, it still serves as a powerful reminder to the world of the waste and wickedness of war.
After 4 months, the Battle of Ebro was lost, and there was now no stopping Franco.
On the 28th of March 1939, the Spanish Civil War finally ended when Franco marched into Madrid at the head of his army.
Franco ruled Spain for the next 36 years. A dark time for the Spanish people. Many railways were destroyed by the war, but the line I'm travelling on today survived, and I'm heading for the mountains.
This is weird. Zaragoza. This is the biggest and emptiest station I've ever seen. There's nobody here. Look at this. You can get something like 10 football matches in here. One train, one man waiting for it. Has there been a nuclear attack they haven't told me about? It's just bizarre. I've never seen a station so big and so empty. This is my train. Lucky I've reserved my seat.
Today I'm travelling on an international line from Zaragoza to the French border in the middle of the Pyrenees. The idea for this line dates back to the 1860s. Local people on both sides of the border campaigned for decades to get it built.
They wanted a railway that went from Aragon in Spain, where we are now, all the way up to Aquitaine in southern France.
With existing lines to France on both coasts, an international mountain line was perhaps a bit redundant, but eventually the will of the people prevailed, and the Goya line was completed in 1928. It must have been tough work building a line nearly 1,000 metres up into the mountains. Based on what I've seen so far today, I'm not sure it was ever a great success. But the Spanish station built up on the border at Canfranc is meant to be a bit special.
End of the line. A great journey that was. Oh, much colder here. Well, it's all right. It's not exactly... we've certainly seen far more spectacular in Alaska, northern... Oh, hang on, though. Oh, look at that. What a station. That's amazing. Look at that.
Canfranc International Station. 240 metres long, with 156 doors and 365 windows, one for each day of the year. This was the second largest station in the whole of Europe when it opened for business in 1928.
Now, though, it's just a ghost station, unloved and pretty much unused. So, what went wrong for Canfranc International?
The vast station was dubbed the Titanic of the mountains, and the icebergs were coming fast. The huge structure with its tiled underpasses and elegant waiting rooms had the capacity to handle thousands of passengers each day, as well as dozens of freight trains. But that never happened.
This is one of the old original booking halls from Canfranc Station. It's one of the few bits that hasn't actually fallen apart. So, in the 1930s, hundreds of passengers would come through here from France, but then there'd be great long delays while they had their passports checked. And then again, there'd be more delays while they waited for their bags to be checked by the Spanish customs. And freight operators had the same sort of delays.
The source of all the delays was, surprise, surprise, our old friend, Mr. Iberian Gauge.
The French very reasonably asked the Spanish if they could lay just standard gauge tracks so that all the French traffic could come through this tunnel 8 kilometres long and carry on right the way down to Zaragoza. Spanish would have none of it. They insisted all the Spanish tracks had to be laid from here in Iberian gauge, the wider gauge. So basically every train arriving from France, all the goods had to be taken off and moved onto another Spanish train by crane, and all the passengers had to get off as well. So people were pretty fed up with the whole thing.
At times during the Great Depression, as few as 50 passengers a day passed through here, making this perhaps the greatest white elephant in the history of the railways. Although in World War II it did have its hour, albeit a very dark one.
Hitler and Franco did a deal that all the illicitly stolen Nazi gold could be moved south using these rail yards here, now long abandoned, while all the tungsten from Spain and Portugal, using the same route, could be moved north. Meanwhile, the tunnel into the town was being used by Jewish refugees and political enemies of the Third Reich. So during World War II, this whole town became a hotbed of Nazis, anti-Nazis, spies and saboteurs.
These days, there's talk of reopening the line and turning this station into a 5-star hotel, but I'm not holding my breath. Instead, I'm heading north to the site of a legendary brief encounter between the two dictators.
Actually, Franco owed Hitler rather a lot. The men and arms that the German dictator had given him helped him win the Civil War. But when World War II started, Franco showed a distinct reluctance to be seen helping Hitler. So Adolf Hitler called for a face-to-face meeting in a little French town called Henderson, which is where we're heading now.
This is quite surreal. Hitler and Franco came here. Franco came in on that side in Spain. Hitler came that side in newly captured France. Franco was about 8 minutes late, which Adolf wouldn't have been too keen on. He, of course, was bang on time, but managed to smile, came across, greeted Franco, took him across to his train. They then had 7 hours of talks. And after all that, the whole meeting was a bit of a disaster. Apparently, Franco just kept banging on about the state and the problems of Spanish economy. Hitler got so bored, he told Mussolini, he'd rather have 3 or 4 teeth pulled out without anaesthetic than ever have a meeting with Franco again. So then the two leaders got back into their 2 trains, waved goodbye to Henderson. Henderson, incidentally, then became a major escape route for people trying to get away from the Third Reich, until the middle of 1945, when it became a major escape route for Nazis trying to get away from the Allies. Isn't it weird how the war turns the world upside down? This station's called Iron Colon, which is what you need with some of the Spanish food I've been eating. This is the last day today. We've got an epic journey ahead of us. What we need now is a commuter train to start this. So it should be coming in. I think this is the one now. There's a lot of trains about. I think for a commuter train, this is pretty smart. Look at this, spotless. Busy, busy, they don't hang about.
Today, it's all change again. Gauge change, that is. I'm exploring the most extensive narrow gauge network in Europe. For me, narrow gauge normally means lovely old heritage steam trains, but not here in the Basque region. From Iron Colon, I'm heading to Bilbao. Then on to my final destination on the Atlantic coast.
The Basques are a very proud, independent people. They have their own customs, they even have their own language. They also have their own very strange sense of humour. They call this train El Topo, the mole, because it goes through a lot of tunnels.
The 780-mile network of 1 metre gauge track dates back to the 19th century. It largely owes its existence to the vast quantities of a very valuable commodity.
Back in the 19th century, this part of Spain possessed an abundance of iron ore, and the men who financed this railway, many of them were Brits, realised if they could get the iron ore to the ports along the Atlantic coast, vast fortunes could be made.
Soon the locals saw the potential and started building passenger lines. And eventually it all joined up to become one huge, sprawling network right across the north of Spain. But in the Franco era, it was lucky to survive.
General Franco closed a lot of lines down during the 60s and 70s. The Basque narrow gauge network was due for closure, but Franco died before the axe could fall, which was one of the many pluses of Franco shuffling off this mortal coil.
Thanks to that fortunate twist of fate, I've now been safely delivered to Bilbao.
Oh, it's raining now. Ugh, that nice morning seems to have been and gone.
Where I haven't come to visit the famous gallery, but a wonderful piece of Industrial Revolution engineering, the extraordinary 125-year-old Vizcaya Transporter Bridge.
This was the first one ever of these transporter bridges. They're pretty clever, 90 seconds to get across. They take about half a dozen cars, quite a lot of passengers. And the good thing about them is big ships can carry on into the port or out to the Atlantic without being disturbed at all or having to do any sort of detour or wait.
The bridge may look like a glorious piece of 19th century vanity engineering, But at the time, it was seen as a clever, cost-effective solution, which it still is. It's brilliant.
The place we're headed to now to catch the last train of my journey is somewhere that, for my generation, just evokes memories of horrific headlines and pictures. The Basque town of Guernica.
In the Civil War, the Basque region backed the Republicans, and this town paid a terrible price. On the afternoon of April the 26th, 1937, a busy market day, German and Italian bombers unloaded high explosives for almost 4 hours.
The bombing of this small town, in which hundreds are known to have died, was the first time ever that a European air force had bombed innocent civilians. Sadly, it wasn't the last.
The bombing of Guernica was a kind of experiment, a trial run for later horrors like the Blitz.
It was ordered by General Franco, an attempt to destroy the Basque government. It didn't, but it did weaken the Republican cause enough to pave the way for his eventual victory. And it taught Hitler how effective attacks on innocent civilians could be.
From the rebuilt station, I've got a short trip to the Atlantic coast.
Bang on time. The last train of our journey.
8 years after Franco's death, the Basques retook control of their railways and together with their neighbours created Europe's longest and I would say cutest narrow gauge network. It could all have been one great big mess, but the railways have helped unite the independently minded regions of this country. After 6 days, over 1,000 miles and 5 different gauges, I've reached the Atlantic.
Look at that. Aye. Big waves. But Mayo's at the end of our journey. Looks a really beautiful place. The weather's not great, but what a lovely little port. This journey's end for us. Brilliant. Oh, that's a big drop. It's always nice to end the programme with the presenter breaking his leg. Hello, Mayo. This is so wild, this coast. It's very, very different from the comparatively placid waters of the Mediterranean when we started this trip in Gibraltar. We've zigzagged our way right up across Spain to the very north. We've been on 10 different trains. It has been actually quite extraordinary. I honestly didn't expect to say this, but considering they had the worst possible start and they insisted on a silly gauge that nobody else in the world used, and they had a bloody civil war, I honestly believe now that Spain has some of the best railways in Europe.